You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hey guys, thanks for coming back to our little old podcast. You're listening to episode number 352 of Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. I must say, I've had some great conversations with hikers recently, which means that you have some terrific shows coming over the next month or so, including today. Many of our guests are people you refer to me. I cold call them, and mainly they're happy to come on the show. So keep the ideas coming. I always enjoy hearing from you. Oh, and by the way, I just realised this today, some of you are just catching up by binge listening to our older shows, and I know that you're writing to me at my old address, which was steve@mightyblueontheat.com. That no longer exists, and I have no access to it. The only one I use is steve@hikingradionetwork.com. I just realised. If you're binge listening to old shows, you probably won't hear this until you get to our more recent shows. You know what I mean. Anyway, once you hear this, you'll know that I wasn't ignoring you. Believe me, I try to answer every single email I receive, so keep writing. Today, our guest is Brittany Rosendahl, or Hot Hands. Brittany was a COVID nurse and she's endured some harrowing moments, so getting out on the trail for her this year was a real blessing. Brittany will be sharing her story shortly. After Brittany, we've got our latest member of the Mighty Blue class of 23. Nancy Farrell is Canadian by birth, yet she also has a home in New Hampshire. She's going to be telling us what she's going to be doing out there next year. Then, in a long reading this week, Jules Stefanos is finally out of Shenandoah, having the dubious distinction of being somebody who had hiked through the Cheneys and the Smokies without seeing a single bear. Even I saw one in the Cheneys in 2019, but to be fair, it was the only one I saw that year. So let's meet up now with Brittany Rosendahl, or Hot Hands. We have one of my Facebook friends on the show today. We've never met, but she connected through listening to the show. This is Brittany Rosendahl. Hey, friend, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Well, nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Now, I know that your getting on the trail was caused in many ways by the stresses you were under during COVID. Tell us what you do and what it was like in 2020 to be in the middle of all of that.
Okay. Yeah. I'm a critical care nurse, and I've been traveling, doing travel nursing for about 6, almost 7 years now. And I was working COVID ICU when COVID hit. It was definitely a very hard time. And I probably saw more people die in that year than I had in my whole entire career. And I've been a nurse for almost 10 years.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's something, that's something I hadn't really thought about. Of course people did. Yeah. So but being critical care, that is exactly what it says it is. You're there, right. You're there in their last days. Did people, were you the one holding the phone to their ear and things like that to speak to family?
I did. We did a lot of FaceTiming with people. We tried to hold, with families, we did hold up phones so they could talk to people, or we were just that person for a lot of people. A lot of times, it kind of went back and forth on, do we intubate people early? Do we wait to intubate them? And so when we did have to intubate them and put them on the ventilator kind of thing, a lot of times it was an emergent situation, and we were just the comfort for those people, because sometimes there wasn't time to call a family member, or, and also just sitting up there with those people. That was probably the hardest thing, is these people not being able to have their loved ones with them in their last days of their life. So
does critical care nursing, or nursing in general, does that make you empathetic, or do you have to bring empathy to it in the first place?
I think a lot of people that go into into the profession have empathy, but I think you gain a lot of empathy through the types of people that you take care of, the stories of those people, what they go through, because a lot of our empathy, right, is gained through experience.
Absolutely.
And so it helps you have a little bit of more of an understanding for a broader range of situations and people.
You had a bit of an OD of it, though, didn't you? Really, I mean, that was way more than any human should really take in many ways.
Right.
So, how long were you actually? It hit us, I guess, from about March. It was bad, March 2020. But you actually got COVID a little later, didn't you? When did you get it?
I did. So I got it. I think it was that December because I worked from March all the way through almost the end of September, took a little bit of a break, and then I went back home and took a local contract here. And I got it working it was like right before Christmas. I was working so I could hopefully maybe see my family over Christmas.
Yeah. I'm sorry to dwell on this a bit. It's fascinating to me. I've not spoken to somebody who was in that situation. How could you see family at all, or could you see nobody?
In the beginning, no. Like I try to isolate for sure in the beginning, and then when we kind of started learning a little bit more about it, it was you could see people outside and keep your distance, that kind of thing.
Sure.
I tried not to go into close, like inside buildings and close settings and stuff like that, just because I was exposed to it too much.
Sure.
And I didn't want to be the person giving it to,
Sure.
a parent or a loved one, family, and then being the cause of them getting sick. And
there were certainly crazy days, no question about it. And even though it's not quite, it's not gone yet, we seem to be managing things better now. But in October 2020, which I guess is 6 or so months after you'd really got involved in COVID and it was just all around you, you said you needed a mental reset. What did that look like for you?
I did need a mental reset. And that was a time where we kind of thought that was trending down, and we kind of thought maybe we're going to be on the up. And so I just got in my truck and took off because I knew I needed to be in nature. And I knew that I just needed to completely step away from the bedside for a moment.
Were you a hiker at the time then?
Yeah, I've always been a hiker. I love exploring. That's like my favorite part of any contract that I go to. I'm going to find the trails around that city and I'm going to go hike, but I wasn't a backpacker.
Right.
And on that trip, I was at Grayson Highlands and I saw some Sobo hikers. And I was like, what are y'all doing? And they were like, we're hiking the AT. But they, when you're that far down, you've already put that many miles in. It's just, you just want to keep your head down and keep going. So they kind of were going quickly. But then there were some section hikers out there that took the time to answer a few more questions. And I think that's just when the seed was planted.
So you'd never really thought about doing a long distance hike. This is just 2 years ago, and you've now completed one. But so what happened? Where was there a switch flipped, or did you suddenly think this is something I need to get away from here?
So I had big plans to do a lot of international travel. Well, of course, the world and the borders shut down. So that wasn't going to be an option. But I knew I needed something that allowed me to step away and just kind of have some time to myself, well, in a sense, and just kind of like not be at the bedside for a while. And so whenever anybody that's done the Appalachian Trail or a through hike, that once you start researching it, if it's something that you're supposed to do, it will not leave you. Like it will haunt you and you will keep researching and you'll go down more and more rabbit holes. And then it's all consuming, right? You just obsess about it. And that's what I did.
Were you doing more day hikes? Because you mentioned Max Patch you went to when we spoke first off. Was that, what was it? Was it the beauty of the place, or was it the adventure of the thing? Was it the thought of 6 months by yourself?
Oh, so when I was eating at a restaurant, I was outside on a patio and there was 2 other women sitting beside me, and it just happened that one of them had through hiked the Appalachian Trail, and she said, you have to go to Max Patch, and I was like, okay. And so I drove out there, and this was fall, and just standing up there with all the fall colors and just something about it was just absolutely peaceful. And I was like, I need this. Like, this is what I need in my life. I think that I need to be in nature for like 6 months and just completely step away from the world, like, outside world in a sense, and just be out there in the nature. And that's what I did.
And you're a contractor, I presume, so you can do what you want, work when you like. Had you saved for this, or did you start thinking about putting it together and saving for it and getting ready to go, or how did you plan it?
I did. I started probably saving maybe a month or so after that, and I just started putting away. And fortunately for travel nurses during COVID, it was higher pay for us.
Sure.
So
Darn right as well, by the way. Yeah. No one would complain about that, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I was able to save quite a bit of money.
And how did you prepare for it though? Were you physically strong at the time, tell us how you put your gear together and how you actually made the physical preparations for it?
I probably should have been a little bit more physically in shape. I was probably I had gained so much weight during COVID, as probably most people did. And I was walking and going on hikes, but there's only so much elevation in Missouri. I was working in St. Louis at the time. And so I was an athlete all growing up, and in my adult life, I've ran some Spartan races. So I knew my capabilities, that I knew that I would be able to tough it out and do some stuff. And I knew I would gradually, I'm a lot of people just say, oh, we can get in shape on trail. So I kind of was in shape, but not where I probably should have been.
No one, you know what? I don't care how fit people think they are. When they start going up and down the hills in Georgia, they're not that fit until they get their legs. And did you find that yourself when you went out there, that perhaps you were a bit wanting when it comes to the physical fitness?
A little bit. I ended up doing almost 14 miles on my third day.
Oh my gosh.
But that was just because I really needed to get to a town.
All right.
So I was trying to get to a Gap so I can go into Dahlonega.
All right, I see.
Yeah.
And what about the gear? Was the YouTube rabbit hole your gear source, or did you ask advice from people? Did you know anybody else who was a hiker or a backpacker at the time?
Yeah, the YouTube rabbit hole, for sure. Through your podcast, I think you talked about some of your gear. Then, of course, Dixie. Yeah. Everybody uses Dixie. But yeah, just lots of different videos. I followed a lot of hikers last year, so Kelly Hayes.
All right.
And a few people on their trail. So that was helpful to see all the stuff day to day on YouTube, how it worked, how it didn't work.
I often wonder how, because I went in 2014 and I seem to remember there was hardly anybody posting videos then. But now, of course, you can follow 50 people if you want to on the trail.
Yeah.
What do you pick up from these people? Or do you think when you get out there, do you think, oh my God, what they said was nonsense, or what they said was really good? Did you take any of those things, absorb all that stuff and actually apply them when you got out there?
I think the most helpful part is just kind of seeing in advance, what the day-to-day is kind of going to be like.
Right.
And then just picking up tips on how you can kind of plan. And because if I would have had those videos, I would have got out there and just been okay, so we're going to walk here. Yeah. But it was just, it took away. I can be an anxious person. So sometimes it's nice to just kind of have an idea of what you're heading into, but it doesn't teach you everything by any means.
No, it doesn't. I don't think there's anything that's worthwhile other than experience once you get out there and see it. Yeah. And see how it affects you, because how it affects you may not be how it affects everybody else.
Right.
And so you knew you'd be going by yourself. Did you consider taking anybody else with you? And I'm not saying because you're a woman particularly, but did you consider trying to go with somebody else, or were you not concerned about going out there by yourself?
I wasn't really concerned about it. I've been travel nursing for 6, almost 7 years, and I've been moving to new places and hiking by myself and traveling internationally by myself. So I wasn't afraid of that part. Right. Yeah. And then I knew that I would meet people. That was one of the biggest things that drew me to the Appalachian Trail, was knowing that the community of it.
Yeah.
And I wasn't worried about meeting people.
Well, I know that we go on about that a lot on the podcast, but nearly everybody comes on and says it is the community and it's the people, and you can be as alone as you wish on the trail and be with as many people as you wish on the trail. So I'm glad that hopefully people realise that, because we do say it all the time. People shouldn't be afraid to go by themselves in many ways, because as you say, you're gonna bump into people, and you did actually bump into Dom tomorrow, didn't you? Was it on the approach? Was it on the approach trail? Did you recognise?
It was.
Did you recognise him from the podcast then?
I don't think I recognized him from the podcast. I had listened to all those episodes, but for some reason it didn't click, but he told me. And then of course I'm like fangirling out. I'm like, oh my gosh, I listened to that podcast. And so we talked, and I saw him a few times in the first few days, but then I didn't really see him after that. But I would he had a YouTube too. So I would comment on his videos every once in a while to just make sure he was doing okay out there. Yeah,
nice. And did you quickly get into the hike? You said you did 14 miles on day 3, but that was to get into town. Were you quite comfortable out there once you got going?
Oh yeah. I mean, there was, I knew how to set up my tent. That was a positive. I had never used like the bear cable, so I'm trying to remember the name of the shelter. That's right before Springer Mountain, but that was like the first time I've ever used like bear cable. So I'm sitting there and I'm looking at them, and I'm like, just trying to like make it, you don't want to look like you don't know what you're doing, right? Like that, everybody portrays themselves to know way more than they really do in the beginning. And so I figured that out. It was great.
But Brittany, remember, you were you didn't want to look like a fool. Everybody else standing there was feeling exactly the same, looking around to see if anybody else knew what to do. And you just have to go for it, don't you, and do it.
You do, and we're smarter than we think, right? And we figure things out.
Now, one thing I didn't know, by the way, from our previous conversation, I still don't know. What was your trail name?
I am Hot Hands.
Oh, now that could be interesting. Now, why is that?
It is.
Why are you Hot Hands?
Well, the reason why I had to get to town on the third day is my sleep system was not warm enough, and I was freezing at night. And so I got a sleeping bag liner in Dahlonega, and then I also picked up a lot of hand warmers. But to me, I've always known them as Hot Hands because that's the brand.
That's right, yeah.
And so I would always tell people, I would be like, yeah, these hot hands are saving my life. And people are like, what are hot hands? And then I would go into stores and like, I need some hot hands. And so Speedway, the one that I was hiking with her pretty early on, and for half of the trail, she named me Hot Hands.
Nice name. Like it.
Yeah.
And you told me that once you're out there, people were drawn to you to tell their stories. Was that because they knew you were a nurse, or did you just open up to them first? Because you sound like, and certainly when we spoke before, a very open person. How did that happen, or is this something you've had all your life where people just tell you stuff?
Oh, that's kind of just been all my life. I can meet somebody, and within like 10 minutes, we could be talking about like the hardest parts of our life. It's just I'm not as much as a small talk person as like I'm kind of like a deep talker, and I think people just pick up on that. And so even friends and family, I'm kind of somebody people come to listen and talk through things. So. But
isn't the trail the perfect platform for that? You stop for lunch, and someone might say, "Oh, I'll come and join you for lunch," and you sit there, you're talking. You got nothing else to do, but other than talk. That's exactly it. And you just talk and chat, and you learn things about each other incredibly quickly, don't you? Mm-hmm. And what, being a nurse, were you actually called to be a nurse on the trail at any time? Did anybody get injured? Did you stand back? I'm a nurse.
No, not really. Every once in a while, like if I could see people getting dehydrated or different things like that, I might like say some comments. But luckily, I did not have to really step up and like use my skill set. So I was very grateful for that. I did have we had some people around us, like I wasn't hiking with them at the time, like Speedway ends up breaking her ankle in the whites. And we had another friend of ours that ends up having a heart attack.
Oh, really? Really?
Yeah. Luckily he was in town though. So good. Thank goodness. But yeah.
Lucky old him. What do you mean? Lucky? It depends what town it was. Many of these towns don't have more than a bar or something. So,
So let me rephrase that. Luckily, he was in a town with a hospital.
Oh, right. Okay, that's good.
Yeah, but I wasn't around at that time either. So I didn't have to really utilize my skills, and I'm very grateful for that.
But what about for yourself? You know, as a medical person, you know things that are going wrong, because one guarantee you're going to get when you're out on the trail is something will go wrong with your body at some stage. Were you able to, if you had plantar fasciitis, for example, or strains, do you know how to treat that sort of stuff?
I mean, right. Like most of the time, what are they going to tell you? Stay off of it. And
yeah, you can't do that.
What are most of us going to do on the trail? Not stay off of it.
That's right.
Actually, I think nurses make the worst patients. We know what you should probably do in a situation, but we're probably not going to do it. I ended up having vertigo. I got vertigo starting right when I got into Connecticut, and I hiked with it for 5 days.
Wow.
And I had a decent fall. That's when I decided to get off the trail, and I probably shouldn't be hiking with vertigo anymore.
Yeah.
But I knew it came on from dehydration, probably more than likely. And
there's no such thing as a decent fall, but don't you? They all hurt.
Well, this one scared me enough to decide to potentially end my hike if it didn't go away. So, yeah, but luckily I didn't get hurt, but it scared me enough that I knew I was not making smart decisions by hiking with vertigo.
Yeah. How'd you cure that? I don't even know how you cured vertigo. Does it just go away?
It eventually finally just went away. I did a, course. I kept going back. I went to an ER the first time. They just gave me some fluids. And then it hadn't gone away over a week. So I finally went to another one, and they're like, well, let's treat it like a sinus infection. So I took some antibiotics, and then it still hadn't gone away. So I got a CT of my head. And we also did at the first ER Lyme panel just to make sure that wasn't Lyme disease or anything. And finally, I was also doing all the funny exercises, the Epley maneuver.
Is that the one where you kneel down and you bend your head and you turn your head to the side or something? Yeah. My ex-wife had that, and it really worked for her as well.
Yeah, I tried all kinds of different things, and I don't know if those helped. I mean, it was almost 2 weeks, so it felt like I was off trail.
Nasty.
But yeah, there's a video of me. I'm in Connecticut somewhere, and Fib is who I was hiking with at the time, and she's just videoing me trying to do these exercises at this one break point.
God.
I was like, I don't think I was doing it right. It does not look right in the video.
Now, you told me when we spoke before that you came out as a gay woman in your 30s, which I guess is pretty late for most people, but you didn't share it with your mother until just a couple of years ago when you were 35 during COVID. Did being on the trail give you time to process that delay in coming out as gay, or had you already gotten comfortable with that decision?
I mean, I had already gotten comfortable with the decision. Whenever I decided to finally come out, I was like, enough is enough. And I just want to be who I am. And so when I decided to come out, that was just kind of all right, here I am. I am not going to apologize for being who I am anymore. I'm not going to hide who I am. But being on the trail was just so nice, because I feel like the people you're hiking with out there, we don't care, It didn't seem like anybody cared.
Yeah.
And the world can still sometimes care. And so that part of it was beautiful and nice, and you could just continue to be who you are out there.
Well, on that subject, as I say, you opened up to me about it, because I actually asked, did you leave a husband behind or something like that? You said no, and then it came out. So
right.
I've often been asked to speak to a gay hiker or a black hiker, but I've always resisted, saying that I'd rather speak with a hiker who happens to be gay or happens to be black. But since you're open with me, and I thought about the hiking community being almost uniformly unbothered with your sexuality. Was that always the case, though? Because you said there were some places you did feel slightly uncomfortable.
So I didn't necessarily feel as uncomfortable in the southern states, but I could see a lot of people feeling that way. I grew up in the South, so I already knew what to expect in those situations. And maybe because I was just so far, I don't care anymore, what people think. It didn't bother me, and I didn't notice it as much, but I know that I've known with other people hiking on the trail and just comments like, you probably still get looks and like, whoa, what's going on? Because
Really?
it's just different. And these are smaller towns, some of them are smaller towns, not much exposure to things. And right, that's really what it is in life, is exposure to things where you realize that, oh, this isn't as odd as one may think.
I've got to tell you, Brittany, if ever you're going to be gay in your lifetime, this is it. I mean, I'm never going to be gay. I'm 70 in 2 days' time. So I'm unlikely to be coming out as gay at this particular late stage in my life. But if I was, I don't think I'd worry too much about it, because this is the time. So, I'm glad. And I never would have thought anyway that anybody on the trail would give you any crap about it, because no one cares, as you say, just no one cares about it. And being Facebook friends as we are, I went to your page today, and a passage that you wrote stood out to me. You wrote, much like the seasons of my life, I realised how I changed and morphed through each of these seasons, which is pretty cool, both on the trail and in my life, forever changing me and moulding me. What did you feel that you had to change, and how did those changes occur as far as you could see?
Through each season, I grew up in a Southern Baptist environment, very religious upbringing. And when I started traveling and stepping away from all of that a little bit, slowly, piece by piece, and seeing other people and seeing different cultures and starting to travel internationally, it just opens up your eyes to a lot of things.
Everybody should travel internationally if they possibly can. There isn't just America, is there?
No. And there's just so much you can learn, right? But with that, I realized that like there wasn't something wrong with me. Like the guilt and the shame that had been molded around how I like my sexuality and what I felt. Like it finally just started breaking down and moving away, and just kind of starting to be more and more freeing. And so when I finally just was able to break down enough of that like guilt and shame that I had built up through coming up in a religious family, I don't know. Like I feel like the most free I've ever felt. I feel the happiest I've ever felt. I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. Even though, I mean, I do have like the post-trail blues right now.
Yeah, that's okay. That's, the mere fact that you say you feel the happiest you've ever felt, that's all you need to think, isn't it? If you're happy, happy days, we'll go for it and make that be part of what you are. And you started in March, and you clearly enjoyed it out there because you took your time, because you finished October the 12th. And those pictures from Payable Bridge were awesome with all the colours and so on. Was it pretty cold by then when you finished?
It was getting down to the 30s at night. Right. We were camping at Rainbow Lake Dam, and we woke up and we had frost on our tents. Like one of my clips on my tent was frozen. We could see snow on top of Katahdin, and I was like, "Yep, it's time to be done."
But were you taking zeros? Because I know you actually said you saved enough money to treat yourself well, and you went into town and stayed in hotels sometimes and sometimes hostels. Did you make it as comfortable as you could, and this is why you took your time?
Yeah, I did. And everybody gets that Virginia. Well, not everybody. Most people get Virginia blues. You're in Virginia forever. It's 500 something miles. I actually took about 10 days off. Oh, yeah. And I flew home and I went to a wedding event for my friends. And then, because I was just kind of getting tired of hiking, and I was not enjoying hiking anymore.
Oh, really?
And so I told myself, if I go home and I'm still thinking about the trail, I'll go back and finish this hike. But if I go home and I'm not thinking about the trail and I'm still ready to be done, I will take the rest of my money and go travel international. So, but of course, I thought about the trail every single day.
So you bought a one-way ticket home?
I actually bought a 2-way. I left a lot of my stuff
Good.
I left a lot of my stuff at Stanimals.
Right.
Because I also was like, no, I'm not going to give myself that easy of an out.
Good.
Like, I'm going to have to fly back and at least get my stuff before deciding to quit.
Yeah. So it was October the 12th you finished. So tell us about your Katahdin day, because normally people are done well before then. So what was that day like for you?
Oh, gosh. We probably had the best weather you could ask for.
I saw your picture. I saw your picture.
Yeah. We had a bluebird sky day. We woke up, it was chilly. We woke up about 5-ish, 5:30. We had a fire. My friend Fib, she wanted to start a fire before the trail ended, so why not the last morning?
Silly not to, yeah, why not?
And we had a fire that morning. We enjoyed our coffee around the fire. We got going about 7:30. I think we got on the trail, and there was 4 of us on our tramline at that time, and then Nemo's dad and aunt joined us for Katahdin. And so there was 6 of us in our group. Yeah. And I mean, that's a hike. That is a Katahdin.
But you've done 2,200 miles to prepare for it, haven't you?
Right. You have, but you do not realize you were going to boulder for 2,000 feet of elevation there.
So the people who come up to join you say Nemo's dad and aunt, who I presume aren't youngsters, do they struggle up there, or were they quite fit?
No, they crushed it.
Oh, gosh.
They've both got their 46 peaks in the Adirondacks already.
Great. That's great.
Yeah, no, they crushed it. I was so impressed with them. But yeah, it was a great day. We did pretty good. We got up to the summit, and I think there was probably 30 of us, 20 to 30 of us up there on the summit that day. And then more of them,
sure.
The youngsters who slept in that day came, and they were finishing when we were going down.
Of course they were, yeah. Youngsters always sleep in, yeah.
Yeah.
So what was it like touching the sun? Was it relief that it was over? Was it sadness that it was over? How did you feel?
It was all of those emotions, right? I'm ready. I was ready to be done, but I knew what I was going to be leaving behind. I wasn't going to be walking with my friends all day. Sure. I wasn't going to be drinking coffee with my friends and laughing throughout the day and eating dinner.
So do you want to make your life more like that, or are you going to try to not so much replicate that, but do it again with other long hikes?
I plan to do the Camino in November.
Nice.
In Spain. Yeah.
November's a bit late.
We're thinking November. It's with some other thru hikers. We just kind of want to the off season. We want to hit the off season.
I went in October and finished in November, and it was getting quite cool towards it, but that's okay. It's not super cold, but there was snow around, and we walked through a bit of snow, but not while it was snowing. We were lucky. There was snow either ahead of us or behind us, but never where we were, which was great.
Okay.
So you'll be doing this. You're talking about this November.
Correct. Well, and then we'll chat. It's just, that's kind of our tentative. Let's throw that on the plate, November. But I think we're going to start really focusing on it in the next coming months. Now, after all of us have readjusted to the real world, right?
Yeah. Don't worry about all that. No, don't worry about all that at all. So are you back to work now?
I am not. I'm working on finding a new contract. My recruiter had switched company, so I had to do some onboarding with a new company. So yeah, when the works of trying to get my new location so I can have some new adventures.
Yeah. And I hope you carry on traveling abroad, because you're right. You learn so much from mixing with other people abroad, and it makes makes your own conversations more vibrant. So I'm certainly glad you do that. And not enough Americans do go abroad, unfortunately, and I think they're missing out on a lot of the world, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Well, look, thank you for sharing your story with us. I appreciate it, and congratulations for completing the trail, and have a great time on the Camino.
Thank you.
In fact, come back and tell me about the Camino when you've done it.
Oh, 100%.
Okay. Good talk to you, okay?
Okay.
Cheers then. Bye.
Bye.
It's kind of ironic that COVID freed her up to get out on the trail and decompress from all the awful stuff she'd been through. And as a Facebook friend, I'd seen some of her posts while she was out there. The algorithm must have paired us up from time to time. She always looked like she was having a blast, and as you heard, she was. And coming out to her mother when she was in her 30s, well, that must have been tough. But she did it. In case some of you don't know, I normally, in fact nearly always, have a pre-recording chat with guests to work out the story they want to tell. And Brittany was happy for me to mention her coming out. It showed guts, and of course, hardly anybody is ever judgmental on the trail. Good for her. Now, before we get to Nancy, I wanted to first thank those of you who have been to our new merch site, hrntradingpost.com. And to those of you who've bought an item, an even bigger thank you. I've been adding more items in the past few days and ironing out a couple of initial kinks, so please check it out. Additionally, the store is now incorporated into the hikingradionetwork.com website, so you can listen to all our shows, click on all the links in the show notes and see all the pictures, as well as checking out the shop, all in the same place. If you have checked it out, please email me your impressions and let me know if you think there are other items we should offer or anything we should change. Cheers. Now, let's meet Nancy Farrell. Our guest today is the first member of the My Blue Class of 2023 who's actually not an American. This is Nancy Farrell. Hey, Nancy, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you, Steve. How are you?
I'm good. And people may recognize your accent as Canadian, hopefully. And are you Canadian born?
I am Canadian born. I'm actually French Canadian, so I'm from Quebec. My first language is French, and I learned English, in high school, basically, and as I traveled around the world. So, I still have an accent. I know.
If I was really impressive, we'd conduct the interview in French, because I learned French when I was a kid.
You did? Really?
We were one of the very first classes in the UK to start speaking French at the age of 9. So it was 1961, something like that. Yeah. Anyway, obviously never took. So now you're going on the trail in next year. The first question I'm asking people, what is your why? Why are you actually doing this? Why do you want to do it?
Really, because very simply, it seems like a great adventure. I love to travel and I love to, meet people, see new places, and it just seems like a great adventure. Of course, I love hiking and I love being outdoors. So those things combine with what seems to be a great adventure challenge. I retired recently and I have the time. I'm able to do it.
Sure.
So I really wanted to do it. And I also, whilst I do it, want to bring awareness to a very worthy organization and try to, raise a little bit of money as well for those organizations.
Tell us about that then. Tell us about the organization.
So the two organizations are Big Brother and Big Sister of New Hampshire.
I was a big brother.
Were you?
I was a big brother,
in the US or in the
US?
UK?
In the US. No, in the US, I was a big brother to a young lad called Quinton from the age of 12 to 18.
Good for you. So I lived in New Hampshire for almost 20 years and became a big twice, actually, to two little. And I just thought it was I think it's a really worthy organization, as you would know if you were a big, where through mentorship is a opportunity to show young people a side of life that perhaps they would not have otherwise had the opportunity to see, and to give them the opportunity to maybe grow to their full potential that perhaps otherwise they wouldn't have, had the opportunity to see that. Yeah. So I want to continue to help the organization, and as I said, particularly bring awareness so that I can hopefully influence others to become big as well. And because they're always in need, of course, of matching big to little. So there's more demand, for big, and particularly men, actually. I didn't know that, but apparently they're needing more volunteer to become big.
I've got to tell you, Quinton and I, we did look the most ridiculous couple. This young black kid going out with this old fat white bloke. It was hilarious, And but I learned a lot about how people live. So tell us about the the second organization?
So the other organization, so I was involved with the Big Brother Big Sister when I lived in New Hampshire, but since then I moved about a year ago, just a little over a year ago, moved to British Columbia, and my boyfriend has been involved with the Special Olympic Organization,
Wonderful.
which is another great, worthy organization where, again, through the sports, through games, they're helping to make the lives of young individuals with intellectual disability, be better, basically. So I recently then became involved with the movement here in Invermere, in our locale, and see what great difference it makes in the lives of those folks. And so, again, wanted to bring awareness to
they're
that
great.
particular.
So what?
Yeah.
I'm happy to put the links to if whatever links you send me, I'll put them in the show notes. But obviously, we're going to want to talk about the hiking as well.
Yes.
We now know what your why is. You want to help these organisations, but you also want the great big adventure.
Yeah.
What is it that you've read or you've heard that makes you think it's a great big adventure and not just a massive pain in the arse when you're out there?
Well, first of all of your podcasts. I have been listening to your podcasts. I'm still catching up with a few that I have not yet. I've gone, like, I started and then went way to the beginning and back to the middle. But I actually started, the very first one I listened to was with RTK. And I remember at the time I lived in New Hampshire and I was driving from my home in New Hampshire to visit my family in Quebec. And I would just listen to the podcast, and it's a 6-hour drive and it would just go so fast, right? So I love
it's a great one for preparation. I must say that's had more downloads since he finished than it did when he was actually hiking, which is quite something.
That's amazing.
So because people look at it as a real great preparation thing. So what is your actual hiking experience? Have you done any other long distance stuff, or have you been a car camper? What have you actually been doing?
So yes, I have done some hiking. So I, as I mentioned, lived in New Hampshire. So I went hiking. My first hiking experience really are in the White Mountains.
Wow.
Which is, I think, a good place to start, maybe. So I
wouldn't have gone near them myself to start with.
So so I'm currently working. I'm not through the list by any means, but I'm working through the 4,000 footer. And I also did another list, which is the 52 mountains with a view. And I've hiked in all seasons in the Whites as well, in the winter, which I love, but it's very, different kinds of hiking in the winter.
I'm sure
in the
it
Whites
is
too.
Yeah,
So
I'm sure it's pretty fierce.
Yeah, but it's also fantastic because you have you can imagine all the deciduous trees have lost their leaves. You have the white ground, and often if you're on a beautiful sunny day, you have blue sky. So you have these beautiful color and open views that are just magnificent. Oh, so anyway, so I've hiked. Yeah, it's really beautiful. So I've hiked in the Whites. I also did years ago in the Whites a 7-day backpacking trip, which was with an organization called Big City Mountaineers. I don't know if you've ever heard of them.
No.
But they their mission is to get young folks from inner city to experience the outdoors. So I took a 7-day backpacking trip, taking 5 young inner city girl that had never been in the woods before, never hiked before, and there was
without their phones. Do they go
there was no
phones?
no phones, nothing, and there was quite an experience. So anyway, so that was my first experience, but we were traveling with other adults that were experienced as well. But more recently, I did a fantastic hike, a 7-day as well. It was 100-kilometer on Vancouver Island. It's called the West Coast Trail. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
No, 100 kilometers, 60 odd miles.
Yeah, but it was a grueling hike. I actually made a movie which I posted on the social media, but it was an amazing experience. And I went with my younger brother, his girlfriend, and one of my cousins. So there was four of us, which was a great thing to share together. But for me, it was my shakedown, because I had all the gear that I have researched and planned and bought already, and I want to really test it out. So I did that in September. So it was a really good hike altogether. It was beautiful, but it also allowed me to test my equipment and see where I need to fine tune and get
And
better organized.
Did you find anything you needed to change?
For the most part, no. But I still have a few little things. Like, for example, I want to document the hike, and I want to use only my phone. I'm still searching for the best widget that's going to be like, something that will be a tripod that's light and that's easy to carry, not bulky. So little things like that I'm still looking for.
Okay.
And the biggest thing really is my footwear. I've hiked to this day, including the West Coast Trail, with boots. And I'm trying to transition to not wear boots, but I'm having a hard time finding the right footwear for me. So that's really like my biggest mission.
That's such a personal thing, isn't it, as well? It really is. So you're obviously physically prepared because you've done this hike up. What about mentally? Because and certainly when I spoke to Bruce, the mental part of the game was really important to him as well. So tell us about how you're preparing for that, or what you're thinking about when it comes to the hike.
Yeah, I try not to think about that one so much, Steve. I'm thinking it's gotta have to be day by day. I don't know what it's going to bring to me, like the difficulties and how I'm going to cope with it. I'm sure I'll have moments like everybody you've had on your show. Everybody have their moment. I'm sure I'll want to quit. Maybe I will quit. I don't know. When I talk about this adventure that I'm wanting to start in March, I tell everybody I'm attempting to do this hike. Yeah.
There will be a time though, Nancy, there will be a moment when you think to yourself, you know what? I'm going to do this. Or, barring an injury, you'll think, I can do this. Is something I know what I'm doing, and it's that moment you think you can start for the first time thinking about Katahdin. In my case, it was about 500 miles before I got to the end. I thought, yes, this is working out for me. I'm kind of getting there. And it's really important to get your mind right about this, because I don't think it's realistic to think about the brown sign at Katahdin from day one.
No.
Because you got the chances of you getting there they're not remote, but they're certainly less than even Steven to get there. So you've got to think of it about this is how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Yeah.
You have to take these chances. I remember getting into Knots Landing, Neil Gap. remember getting into Neil Gap thinking, that was a long 3-4 days, whatever it was. And I thought, my gosh, I've got to do it about another 100 times before I get there. So, you had to get some perspective to what it's like, and you have to get your head right there. Are you getting support from home? Are you going to resupply in towns? I mean, what are you thinking?
So I actually recently visited I still have a home on the seacoast in New Hampshire, and I recently visited my home there. And probably the last time until I go back in March before I get started. And so I'm celiac, Steve. So I wasn't sure how easy it was going to be for me to resupply in towns. I'm sure the bigger towns I shouldn't have too much of a problem, but I wasn't too sure.
You will have problems. You will have
think
problems.
So?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I don't think many towns close to the trail can cope with that. But you need to find a food that suits that illness. I know what that illness is like. I was married to somebody who has celiac. Yeah. And that will knock you out totally, won't it?
With that in mind, that's why I decided to prepare some mail drops whilst I was back in New Hampshire. I kind of did a lot of boxes, and I'm gonna drop those with a friend, and then she wanted to support me in this, so she will be the one kind of sending me mail boxes. And if I found that in fact it has to go through to the entire trail, or as far as I can go, then I will, continue to do it this way. I didn't do, the entire 6 months of mail drops, obviously, but I prepared for quite a few months, and then we'll kind of just go from there. So,
Nancy, I've got to tell you, it's very unlikely that the dollar store are going to be gluten-free friendly.
Yeah, that's what
it's just going to be an issue. I think that will be an issue for you, and that's an interesting thing. I'm going to think about that and wonder how you can cope with that. But let me think about that. And so, you're going to be cooking you're going to rehydrate your food and that. What are you actually most looking forward to on the trail? Is it a view? Is it a place? Is it people? What is it you're looking forward to?
Yeah, I mean, like right now, what I'm looking forward to the most is just starting because it feels like I've been thinking about it for so long, right?
Awesome.
So, and then really, I'm just really looking forward to the day by day. Like I'm really looking forward to enjoying every moment of every day. The views, of course. I mean, just being outdoors.
I guarantee you won't.
Yeah, I know. Like on the flip side, I fear, like one of the things that I fear the most is thunderstorms. Like and I know from hearing all the hikers that you've interviewed and all the people that I've spoken to that have done it, I fear like 4 or 5 days of just constant rain where nothing dries. That's my worst. But I see what some folks have done, and when you get to this, you got to get out of the trail and just take a rest, and hopefully the rain stops and your stuff dries and you go at it again. So
something I actually forgot to ask you though is, when actually are you starting?
March 22nd.
I started March 22nd first time.
Yes, I know that.
How about that? How
yes,
cool.
I do.
Yeah, listen, this old guy got there, so you should be fine.
I hope so.
We got cold weather. We got snow in the Smokies. That was in April. So that cold weather is still going to be around. So you're looking forward to I know people want to look forward to the whole thing, and taking those views in is really important. Why you've got them
for sure.
And what are you least looking forward to?
It really is, what I mentioned before. It's just like rain, just rain. I think anything else, and then of course, probably the first thing before the rain is injuries. So like I'm reading a book right now about foot care, like this whole book just about foot care, and really so it's injuries is probably the thing that I think the most. I think that's what takes. If it's not.
There's just no point in worrying about or thinking about injuries. They're going to happen or they're not. You have to do your best to avoid it. You're taking 5 million steps, and any one of those could end your hike, which is kind of a frightening thought. But so in many ways, it makes it pointless worrying about it, doesn't it? Because just keep walking, put one foot in front of the other. And what about trail names? Have you considered what you might like to be known as, or have you already sort of picked one out?
So somebody gave me a trail name already.
Oh, cool.
Which is Blue Sky. So
nice.
Yeah, I kind of liked it.
Yeah, real nice. Yeah, it
came out of he was a new friend. I was at a dinner party and he was telling some story, and I tried to I guess look at the bright side of things in his story, as he was really kind of looking at the negative side. And he came out of the blue. He said, "Oh, you're so blue sky in that, wow, you're." And then through the weekend, we spent a lot of time on the weekend, and he kept coming back because I was always giving people the benefit of the doubt, I guess. So he's like, "Yeah, you're blue sky Nancy." And I thought, what, this could be a good name. So I kind of took it.
It's a real good name. I like that. Yeah,
Thank you.
I kind of like that. Yeah, and you know what? When you're sitting looking out for shelter on the 5th day of rain, just think about the blue skies. That's what you need to think about.
That's what I will think about.
Like I do to everybody who's in this group, I wish you the best of luck, because you need luck probably more than anything on the trail. Yeah. I wish you enjoy it. Hope you enjoy it, and also hope you check in with us every now and then and make sure you keep us updated with what you're doing. But I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your story with us.
Thank you very much, Steve. I look forward to being on your show and being on the trail, hopefully hiking through. Thank you.
Cheers then. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.
I love the fact that Nancy is a listener who has clearly been encouraged by our guests to attempt this epic hike. No one here is trying to push unprepared people onto the trail. We're just hoping that, like Nancy and many other listeners, you'll realise that it isn't just for an elite group of athletes. Let's face it, if an old fat bloke like me can do it twice, well, It's definitely doable. We'll be catching up with Nancy and all the others just as they get ready to head out next year. Just before we get on to our reading this week, thanks as ever goes to our wonderful donors. This week, monthly donors Gail Posey, Sabre Thompson, Todd Withrow and Suzanne Johnson have stepped up again, while Dennis Young also made a kind donation. Thanks to you all. Now, George Stefanos is finishing out the Shenandoah National Park. I must say I enjoyed the park. It was a nice breather and nowhere near as taxing as other sections of the trail. It's also the only place you're almost guaranteed to spot a bear. Fortunately for him, George didn't. I'll see you next week. Wednesday, the 6th of July 1983, mile 910.4. Thus far in Shenandoah, in order to spend each night in one of the huts, I've been forced to choose between a long and a short hike each day. Monday, I had a choice between hiking 13 miles or 21. I chose a 21-mile hike. Yesterday, my choice was between 13 miles and 24. I chose 24. Today, it was 15 or 28 miles. You know, I've always been fond of the number 15. It has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? 15. As usual, Mark left the shelter about a half hour before I did. As he was leaving, he good-naturedly accused me of deliberately allowing him to begin hiking first every morning in order to have him clear the trail of spiderwebs for me. I innocently replied that I did not know what he was talking about. He didn't seem to believe me. The Appalachian Trail today passed several groves of red spruce and balsam fir. These trees, native to the cold boreal forests of Canada and the mountains of northern New England, grow only in scattered colonies at the higher elevations in the southeastern United States. The last time I had seen them was around the summit of Mount Rogers, more than 400 miles ago. According to my guidebook, my next encounter with them will be in Vermont. Once I've left Shenandoah, I'll be travelling through the lowlands of the Appalachian Trail until New England. Therefore, I'm glad I decided on the shorter hike today. It gave me some extra time in order to fully savour the dwindling stretch of highlands. The AT climbed to a low sag between Hawksbill Mountain and Naked Top and passed across the northern face of Hawksbill. For a time, it followed a narrow shelf sandwiched between the tops of one set of precipitous cliffs and the base of another. The cliffs above me, vertical walls with impressive craggy tops, had spilled a considerable amount of rubble along the edge. The rocky trail was not kind to my battered feet. A raven who had been perched on a treetop along the cliffs took off as I went by. His beautiful, sleek black plumage and surprisingly athletic flight for a bird of his size seemed to belie the fact that he was, after all, basically just a big old nasty crow. Several viewpoints looked out upon a deep wooded hollow carving down through the spur ridges and foothills. Between two ridges, a triangular slice of the Shenandoah Valley was visible, looking quite lovely as usual. North of the hollow, Stony Man Mountain also gazed westward across the valley towards Massanutten Mountain and the distant Alleghenies. The vertical cliffs gave way to steep slopes, and the AT began to descend diagonally across them as it approached Hawksbill Gap, crossing wild jumbles of grey boulders whose slide down the mountain had obliterated wide swathes of trees. Lower down, I traversed older slides over which the trees had grown back up. 2 one-mile side trails led to the summit from the AT, but I had to pass on them because of my sore right foot. I'll be back someday to more thoroughly explore this wonderful area. Passing just below the ridge crest at Hawksbill Gap, the Appalachian Trail continued to slab the western slope of the ridge, often on a narrow shelf between cliffs. It passed beneath another old lava flow, a massive spike-tipped hunk of rock called Crescent Rocks. Several ledges along the route gave me a dead centre view down that wooded valley I saw from the ledges of Hawksbill. On the map, it's called Timber Hollow. The bottom of the valley opened into a large bowl of green fields encircled by low wooded hills. The village of Ida, one of several places where the US government resettled the mountain people displaced by the creation of Shenandoah National Park. After Crescent Rocks, the shelf broadened into a wide plateau for a while, the Appalachian Trail following the western edge. A grassy mowed field just below the Timber Hollow overlook on Skyline Drive gave an up-close view of Timber Hollow and the best view of Ida's little valley, a couple of small openings in the hills connecting it with the Shenandoah Valley beyond. To the south was the unmistakable profile of Hawksbill, while Pollock Knob loomed ahead of me northward. Pollock Knob was a high point on the southern ridge of Stony Man Mountain. Several outcrops along the western edge of the ridgetop looked out over Timber Hollow, Ida, the Shenandoah Valley and the Blue Ridge north from Hawksbill. One or two secluded homesteads dotted the foothills above Ida. The Appalachian Trail wound briefly over the crest before descending on a side hill trail along the ledges. Soon I was walking along a flat section of ridgecrest, past the wire fence of a large corral on which horses were quietly grazing. This was my introduction to Skyland, a resort dating back to the 1880s, well before the establishment of the national park. Hiking through the place was a rather bizarre experience. One moment I was walking on a trail along the edge of the woods, and the next I was following a gravel track past a set of stables. 4 people on horseback were standing side by side in a row in front of the stables, apparently waiting for someone or something. As I approached, I noticed them all staring at me with dour and mindless expressions. I tried to stare them off, but they didn't look away, so I said hello to one of them. No response, just more blank stares. I said hello to the second rider. Still no response, and no break in the rude staring. I just laughed and continued walking, whistling the theme from The Twilight Zone as loudly as I could manage. People who apparently consider themselves to be superior to you hate to be laughed at. Perhaps they were part of some secret government experiment attempting to discover whether the lobotomized could still ride horses. The Appalachian Trail runs past a restaurant in Skyland. I'd been planning on grabbing a meal there, but my feet were throbbing fiercely, and I doubted my will to keep going after a long break. Shortly after leaving Skyland's gravel and cement paths behind, I sat down in a quiet grove of towering hemlock by Furnace Spring and ate a couple of granola bars. A 6-inch diameter pipe was gushing cold water out of a spring house built into the side of a small hillock. The water was delicious, but a restaurant meal would have been nice. The trail after Skyland skirted the west side of Stony Man Mountain, climbing along some cliffs, passing through stately, often huge, stands of hemlock with some large old white pines and oaks. The forest had an aura of great age. Perhaps that was a result of being part of the Skyland Resort, or probably it had more to do with the very rugged terrain. Certainly it would have been difficult to lumber economically. Jagged rocks protruded out of the ground and large boulders perched upon the steep slopes. There were rocks everywhere. The path was strewn with stones. Once again, my feet were taking a terrible pounding. The Appalachian Trail passed a massive rock cliff with jagged projections overhanging the trail. Tiny springs were trickling down the face, staining the rock black where it was not covered with vivid green moss. I saw a 3-inch long centipede crawling along the rock edge that the trail was following. The AT crossed a rock slide with views of the Shenandoah Valley and began to descend slightly along the face. Near the base of Little Stony Man's massive cliffs, the trail came to a rounded ledge of naked rock with some wonderful views. Skyline Drive to the north, skirting a low knob and the pinnacle, a good look at Stony Man's profile to the south, a wide portion of the Shenandoah Valley with 3 secluded foothill valleys in the foreground. A couple of miles later, the Appalachian Trail followed a paved path along the fringe of the Pinnacle's picnic grounds, a large field with scattered pines and clusters of laurel along the crest of a knob just south of a mountain called the Pinnacle. I took my lunch there. As usual, I had arrived at a picnic area in Shenandoah National Park when it was virtually empty of tourists. I had peanut butter crackers and tang for lunch again. It begins to appear that I will be one of the few thru-hikers who pass through Shenandoah without receiving even one small treat off the barbecue of a friendly tourist. At any rate, it felt good to take off my boots and socks for an hour. Masses of boulders were strewn in random, often fascinating formations throughout the laurel thickets along the narrow crest of the Pinnacle. Near the summit, a long series of projecting rocks thrust out towards the Shenandoah Valley. The entire western face was a jumble of crags, cliffs and loose rocks stretching halfway down the mountain. A web of stream-carved hollows united into one vast foothill valley below, where a couple of small lakes glittered amongst the forests and the fields. Beyond the hills lay the Shenandoah Valley crossroads town of Luray. The trail descended along a ridge where many rocks continued to beat the crap out of my feet. On the floor of a sag, it came into a meadow at the end of a grassy road leading up from Skyline Drive. There, in the middle of the woods, sat a lonely 3-sided stone picnic shelter called Bird's Nest No. 3. A large brick fireplace and chimney was built into one of the inside walls, and a single picnic table sat upon its concrete floor. A water fountain supplied with piped water from a nearby locked spring box stood right alongside. A picnic shelter was a rather strange finding on a rather secluded stretch of the Appalachian Trail, but that's Shenandoah. I kicked back for a few minutes to give my poor feet a break and savour the strange beauty of the spot. The AT followed another stretch of narrow, boulder-strewn ridgecrest for a while, with good views westward of the Shenandoah Valley and the hollows running down the flanks of the Blue Ridge to join with it. About a mile later, after a climb, the trail skirted around an enormous mass of ancient exposed rock sitting atop the wooded crest. This was Mary's Rock, which turned out to be the scenic highlight of my most scenic day in Shenandoah. A short spur trail led to the base of the outcrop. Mary's Rock towered high above the deep Blue Ridge pass called Thornton Gap. From its base, nearly every mountain up ahead in the northern third of Shenandoah National Park stretched before me in one mighty vista. The entire area was swarming with day hikers and tourists, but I threaded my way up towards the summit. The top of the rock was a series of interconnected rock wedges jutting almost straight up from the crest. The summit rose a good 20 to 30 feet above the surrounding treetops. From there, I experienced the only legitimate, unobstructed 360-degree view in Shenandoah. It blew everything else away. Miles of the Blue Ridge unfolded to the north and south, a prospect stretching from Stony Man to Dickey's Ridge, about 40 miles apart via the Skyline Drive. Beyond the ridges and hollows to the west, a good chunk of the Shenandoah Valley lay simmering beneath the July afternoon haze. The most amazing vista lay eastward, where a huge expanse of the Piedmont seemed to go on forever, dissolving into the sky near the horizon, the haze uniting earth and air in the distance into one steamy grey mass. The Piedmont is rolling country, broken by large rivers, but from this height and distance all looked flat and featureless except for a few isolated hills. It looked like an enormous, multicoloured pancake frying on the griddle of a Virginia summer. I lingered but a short time on Mary's Rock. My foot was still throbbing with pain, and I was wanting badly to be at the shelter with the day's hike completed. The 2 miles downhill from Mary's Rock to Thornton Gap were covered with the most vicious rocks of the day. They brutalised my foot. I was elated to reach Skyline Drive at a parking area in the floor of the gap, knowing that the descent was over. I had intended to stop for a meal at the Panorama restaurant in Thornton Gap. I decided to go on past. I was little more than a mile from Pass Mountain Hut, where I could make my own dinner and lie down. The afternoon heat had drained my appetite, and thus my desire for a restaurant meal. I pressed on, crossing US 211 below Skyline Drive, and began the climb up Pass Mountain. The terrain along the Blue Ridge changed immediately upon crossing the gap. The rocks and cliffs, boulders and crags, outcrops and thrusting rock slabs, rocks and stones, and rocks of the central portion of Shenandoah gave way to somewhat gentler slopes on Pass Mountain. Pass obviously had a rich agricultural history. The Appalachian Trail and the side trail to Pass Mountain Hut crossed numerous old fields where briars and small trees crowded together atop the grassy forest floor. The side trail followed a grassy old road which felt like heaven to my feet. The shelter sat in a meadow which had been freshly mown, filling the air with the nostalgic and, in my case, almost forgotten aroma of suburbia. Surrounding the meadow were acres of old overgrown trees and orchards, where tangles of briars formed an impenetrable mass between the old trees. I arrived at the shelter before 4 o'clock, despite all my long stops today and the battered condition of my feet. Mark was already at the shelter. So too was another large group of people, but Mark assured me that they were not staying. Later, he told me they had intended to stay, but he had informed them that the shelter capacity was 7, and he was not about to make room for 12 people on a night when it was not raining. Do any of these people even bother to read the list of park regulations that they receive along with the camping permits? The group camped in a clearing nearby, another rule violation, and came over to use the shelter's fireplace to cook their dinner. They were an interesting crew, a church group from Texas. Before they ate, they sang grace. That's right, they sang it. They sang a little prayer of thanks to the tune of Jingle Bells, while I stared straight down on the shelter floor and fought off the urge to giggle. These were mostly grown men and women. Later, after they had left, Mark told me that he could see the struggle through which I was going. To both of our credits, neither of us heathens laughed out loud. During our conversation that night, he also told me a joke, which I liked. 2 backpackers were hiking through the woods. Suddenly, they saw a large bear charging down the trail towards them. The first backpacker froze for several seconds. Then he turned to his companion, who had emptied the contents of his backpack all over the ground and was proceeding to put on his running shoes. "Are you crazy?" the first backpacker demanded. "You can't outrun a bear." I don't have to, his friend replied calmly. I just have to outrun you. As we talked, Mark confided to me that he very much regretted not having the time to savour the sights and experiences of the Appalachian Trail. Unfortunately, with only slightly more than 3 months available for his hike, he must average better than 20 miles per day in order to complete the trail. This tyrannical schedule leaves him with little time for sightseeing and drains him of the inclination. His deepest regret is that he no longer has the ambition to simply lay back on the ground outside at night and stare up at the starry black sky, which had always been one of his cherished pastimes while hiking and camping. Apparently, his stoic nonchalance towards the beauties of the trail was merely a protective facade. Hearing this, I regretted having been such a smartass when joking about him with other hikers. Last night's gabfest of sardonic humour and funny stories from our lives had drawn us closer and broken the icy reserve with which people like Mark, and to a lesser extent me, face the world. We talked together far into the night, navigating much deeper waters than we had last night, discussing our mutual sensations of becoming consumed by the Appalachian Trail and our obsessive quests for Katahdin. I told him of my realisation that I hardly ever talk or think of my life before the trail. At night, my dreams are only of the trail. He agreed that his experience has been identical. He turned out to be a deeper and more thoughtful guy than most of the hikers who joke about him will ever imagine. I'm happy to have had these past 2 nights as a chance to get to know and begin to understand him. I had a big day today for a 15-miler. I finally caught up to that 14-mile-per-day pace I must maintain in order to reach Katahdin safely before the snows arrive, and I passed the 900-mile mark on this hike. 1,228.1 miles to go. Thursday, the 7th of July, 1983, mile 933.6. The trail was excellent today, and there continued to be far fewer rocks along the footway. Thanks to this factor and yesterday's short hike, the condition of my feet was much improved, and I flew. The crest of Pass Mountain featured many relatively flat areas as the Appalachian Trail passed through old orchards and fields, cool pine groves, and occasional rock outcrops. Many of the fields were twisted, solid masses of briars and tall weeds above the grassy floor, but I did cross several meadows of tall grasses stirring in the morning breeze. The grassy footpath was gentle on my feet, and the soft carpet of needles beneath the pines felt heavenly. The entire crest was flat or gently sloping, save for in the vicinity of the gaps on either side. The summit was a flat-topped wooded knoll rising slightly above the remainder of the crest, with a scattering of boulders beneath the trees. The only viewpoint on the mountain was from a line of rocks a short distance to the left of the trail, not far past the summit, overlooking the outlying ridge of Neighbour Mountain to the west and the intricate network of hollows running down from the slopes around Thornton Gap towards Luray in the Shenandoah Valley. Pass Mountain was deer heaven. I saw more deer in the tall grass and pine groves of this mountain than I had seen in the rest of the park combined, which had not been an inconsiderable amount. It seemed every time I looked up, white tails were bobbing off into the trees. I walked by a large group lying directly beside the trail in the middle of an extensive, overgrown old orchard. They didn't even budge as I went by. Once again, I was amazed and touched by their lack of fear towards me. Once again, the venison tasted great. I hiked the 7.5 miles from Pass Mountain Hut to Elk Wallow Gap in 2 hours and 45 minutes, arriving at the Skyline Drive crossing in the Gap at 9 o'clock. The little store and snack bar in Elk Wallow Wayside was just opening. Someone finally gave me a burger in Shenandoah National Park. The attendant in the snack bar, after I'd handed him some money. It was still a pleasant experience. I devoured a cheeseburger, some fries, and a chocolate milkshake. After days of steaming, oppressive heat, today was breezy and cool, awakening my dormant appetite. The accustomed white, washed-out sky was a deep Octoberish blue. At the store, I picked up a box of Pop-Tarts and a box of granola bars. I was all out of both. I'd also eaten all my crackers, but I opted for a loaf of rye bread instead. It was an excellent decision. I think that I will get bread rather than crackers more often when I hit stores in between trail towns. When I'm leaving a town, my backpack is crammed full of food for the trail, and crackers require less room than bread. Between towns, my pack empties out, and I can buy a fresh loaf of bread and truly live it up. Hogback Mountain was spectacular, although Skyline Drive was a constant presence. The trail over the fourth peak ascended gently along a grassy, wooded crest strewn with boulder fields. Beside the summit was a tiny, rocky meadow encircled by small trees. Standing atop the highest rock, I could catch a faint glimpse of the Piedmont country to the east and just the bare outline of the high ridges to the south. That was just a faint taste of what was to come. Descending gently, the AT crossed the drive in a shallow sag and climbed the third peak. Another small meadow crowned this summit, but the crest was flatter and the surrounding trees taller. There were no views. A short spur trail to the left led to some giant boulders just above the hogback overlook on Skyline Drive, where a magnificent view unfolded. Miles of the Page Valley culminating at the northern end of Massanutten Mountain, where the severed halves of the Shenandoah Valley were reunited into one sprawling agricultural plain stretching forever toward the Alleghenies. Northward, I could follow Skyline Drive all the way to its terminus in Front Royal. In the foreground, Hogback's second peak bristled with radio towers. Below, Browntown Valley, a big, beautiful hollow encircled by the Blue Ridge and some spur ridges and foothills, was a tapestry of fields, farms and a tiny azure pond. The AT crossed the north end of the overlook, where the view was almost identical, and climbed along and beside the tower's access road to the second peak. The road ended in a wide circle on the summit, surrounded by towers, equipment buildings and tall trees. The trail descended to a field at the top edge of a nearly vertical drop-off of the western face of the Blue Ridge, looking directly down the centre of Browntown Valley towards the vast plain of the northern Shenandoah Valley. The entire ridge of the second and first peaks of Hogback was covered with massive clusters of mountain laurel. The fine views north and west continued over First Peak and Little Hogback. The Appalachian Trail brushed close to Skyline Drive several times and crossed it once along its long descent to Gravel Springs Gap. In the gap, the AT crossed the drive once again and began to ascend South Marshall. The road was much less obtrusive on Marshall Mountain, with only one trail crossing and no other close approaches. Ledges and rock slabs near the top of the ascent gave a great view of the grey strip of Skyline Drive snaking around Hogback's green summit southward and descending Dickey Ridge into the Shenandoah Valley to the northwest. The trail descended to cross the drive in the fair-sized plateau between Marshall's peaks and climbed North Marshall. A ledge just above the AT along the ascent had a 180-degree view stretching from southwest to northwest, including the Blue Ridge south from Hogback all the way to Hawksbill. Views of the Shenandoah opened as I reached the crest, following a line of westward-facing cliffs. As the ridgeline narrowed, a nice view of the Piedmont appeared from some eastward-facing outcrops. Beneath today's clear skies, the prospect was especially impressive. An endless sprawl of farms, towns and solitary wooded hills stretching to a distant horizon. The summit was a big, jagged, westward-facing spur of rock, with tiptoe views of the Shenandoah Valley north of Front Royal and the Blue Ridge north of Shenandoah National Park, where the range dwindled to a low, flat ridge projecting up through Maryland. The park is a swan song of scenic grandeur for northbound Appalachian Trail hikers until they reach New England. In Compton Gap, 21 miles into my hike today, the Appalachian Trail crossed Skyline Drive one final time. At this point, the drive departed the crest of the Blue Ridge and descended along a spur ridge to its northern terminus at Port Royal in the Shenandoah Valley. After 200 miles of paralleling the drive and its extension, the Blue Ridge Parkway, I was leaving the road behind. The trail followed an old woods road over the crest for another couple of miles. Then it, too, left the ridge crest and began to descend. Almost immediately, the AT exited Shenandoah National Park, crossing into private lands. It soon entered a camping area known as Tom Floyd Wayside, where an absolutely gorgeous shelter, which even boasted a built-in sun deck on the front, perched along the side of a steep wooded slope. That's where I'm staying tonight. I'm out of Shenandoah National Park, never once having been fed by the tourists. The park bears make out better than I did in that respect. As I've said, I fed myself a few times, so I can't complain. Although I was disappointed to have walked through both Shenandoah and the Great Smoky Mountains National Park without seeing one bear, that's life. I hiked 23 miles today. That means I've travelled 103 miles from Rockfish Gap in the past 5 days. My hiking has improved considerably since Georgia. The new lightweight hiking boots that my family mailed to me in Waynesboro are working out very well. I'm now sure I can successfully complete this quest as long as my determination holds up and I can avoid major catastrophes. I'm less than 55 miles from the end of Virginia. I've given myself an easy day tomorrow, 13 miles to the next shelter. A considerable amount of road walking lies just ahead, making for some relatively easy miles, and Mark plans on utilising that tomorrow to crank out a 32-miler to the second shelter. I really am going to miss him. I'm still not sure exactly why.